I once started a meeting by starting the record, and it gives that little announcement auditorily to everyone, and someone else just said amen, and we called that our opening prayer. So we'll be a little more formal this evening. Good evening to everyone. The Women's Caucus and the Nominating Committee of the Church of the Brethren are delighted to welcome you to this workshop on leadership, specifically on what's involved in the nomination process, both for nominator and for nominee, and what happens after a nomination form is completed. Our denomination has a diversity of members and gifts, and that diversity has not always been reflected in the leadership. In conversation with annual conference officers and nominating committee members, we've learned that in the process of nomination, many gifted candidates are lost along the way to the ballot. Many, especially women and people of color, because they don't complete the nomination form. And so we coordinated this workshop to demystify that process, to make it transparent as far as how to go about nominating and being nominated, accepting a nomination, in the hopes that more of us will feel empowered and inspired and supported by one another and by the Holy Spirit as we respond to being nominated or the call to nominate others. Beloved church, will you pray with me? Christ, whose body is made up of many members, we ask your blessing on this gathering. May the sharing be inspiring, empowering, and clarifying. May the listening be engaged, dynamic, and blessed. Holy Spirit, we seek your leading and your guidance that Christ's church may be a model of the Creator's dream of shalom for all people and all living beings. In Jesus' name, amen. So I believe that Kim and Kurt have got some questions and answers to share with us in our next piece of presentation. Over to you.
To start things off, I'm Kim, and many of you I know, some I don't. I am the current chair of the nominating committee, standing committee nominating committee. And Kurt Borgman is also here, and he has been the chair of the nominating committee several years in the last 5 years. Both of us have been on the committee a couple of different times just because of the way the process works on standing committee. We happen to be elected more than once. So the others who are here are Chris, Douglas, and Jim, who have committee, and of course now that will be Rhonda and Jim for a little while, working with the nominating committee as consultants. And so they are often the people that the committee turns to when there are questions of procedure or polity involved. And hopefully they will jump in tonight whenever they feel they need to add anything or clarify anything for us. So we're all glad to be here. What we thought we would do is simply to walk through the nomination process. And this may not be new for many of you. But if you haven't done it, it's kind of nice to just follow the steps, and we're doing it in a sort of mock role play fashion where Kurt will be the nominator and I will be the nominee, and Chris will help us hopefully see the forms that we need to go to. This is just on the theory that it's easier to see something happening or experience it a little bit than it is just simply to hear about it. So bear with us in our role playing, and we'll begin with Kurt starting the process as someone thinking about nominating.
Yeah, the first thing I would do is look at the offices open for nomination. So Chris, do you want to pull up that document as it would appear on the annual conference website? I would go to the annual conference website and find the offices for nomination.
I'm trying to get there, Kurt.
I just shared the link in the chat for you guys.
Okay. Is it showing now?
No.
How did it do it in the practice session then? You're still not seeing it.
Well, while you're looking for it, I'll just keep moving forward. The offices on the 2022 ballot can be found on the annual conference website. There's a button that says nominations. And when you click that button, it'll show all the offices open for nomination. And each of those offices has its own drop down that gives you more detail about the offices. And so, for example, in 2022, we'll be electing a moderator-elect. There it is. The annual conference secretary, which is a 5-year term. Jim Beckwith completes his term, so it'll be somebody besides Jim. Program and Arrangements Committee, Mission and Ministry Board, Bethany Theological Seminary trustee, and there's 2 categories for that, representing Brethren colleges and representing clergy. Brethren Benefit Trust Board shows the skill set that they're looking for. On Earth Peace, and then Pastoral Compensation and Benefits Advisory Committee. So if I'm looking at that list and I'm thinking about people and I settle on, let's say, Mission and Ministry Board, and I'm looking at that and I see Mid-Atlantic District is there. And I used to be in the Mid-Atlantic District before I moved to Indiana. So you don't have to nominate somebody from your own district. I know a lot of people in Mid-Atlantic, and one of the people I know is Kim McDowell. Now, obviously, she's on nominating committee, so I can't nominate her for an office, but let's pretend that she's available for that. And I look at the Mission and Ministry Board. Can you come down, Chris, and show the more info under Mission and Ministry Board? It talks about eligibility. It talks about qualifications. The composition of the board. And I'm thinking about Kim, and I see her as a person who really knows the church broadly. She's had different offices at the denominational level, the district level. I know her personally. She was one of my pastoral colleagues, and I think Kim would be a good person for that. So I'm going to go then to the next page that allows me to nominate, complete a nomination form. And I'm going to type in, we're not going to fill in all this form, but I'm going to type in Kim's name, her email address, which I happen to have since I know her. But I could search it. I could probably find it if I was needing to do that. The office that I want to nominate, for which I want to nominate her as we're going down the form. And then down there it says reason for nomination. And this is important because I want them to know why I'm nominating Kim. Oh, Chris already can read my mind. Kim rocks, she puts there, which is true. I'm not sure I would put it that way. That's more Chris's style than mine. But I would talk about the reasons for nomination. Kim, like I said, has a lot of denominational experience. I experience her as a clear thinker. She's a good communicator. She functions well in boards. I've been with her on the nominating committee, but I know she's also been on some other boards in addition to nominational boards. So whatever I think would be a good descriptor of her qualifications. I've done all that. What will happen is that nomination, I fill in my own name, right, and my email. That nomination will be now Kim will be notified that I've nominated her. Now, this is where I want to insert something that's doesn't have to be done, but I think it's really important. I'm going to call Kim on the phone. She's going to get notice from the annual conference office that she's been nominated, but I'm also going to call her and I'm going to talk with her and tell her why I've nominated her. And I want to encourage her to really think about that nomination. So I'm on the phone with Kim and I say, "Hey, Kim." And she says, "Oh boy, Kurt Borgman calling, this can't be good news." And I say, "Kim, I've been thinking about the nomination form for annual conference offices, and I decided to nominate you for Mission Ministry Board. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I did that. And I hope you'll think about responding to that nomination, accepting that nomination. Okay, Kim?
Yeah, so I might say, well, I did get an email from the annual conference office alerting me to the fact that you had nominated me. So this is not a complete surprise, and I appreciate your thinking about me. I have some questions right off the bat as I think about it for myself. I worry about the state of the church and our investments of energy and whether this is a place I want to invest my energy. I'm a little bit thinking about the logistics. I read under the description of Mission and Ministry Board what's expected in terms of time. And I recognize that there are some significant time commitments. So I'm thinking about those things. Thank you for nominating me, and I will spend a little time before I make up my mind. So then we might hang up, and I would take this decision to the whatever people help me with that kind of discernment and to prayer, and try to process it a little bit with my family, with my church, if it meant that I would be spending considerably more time away with friends, however each of us does that discernment process. But finally, let's say I consider the fact that this is one role that I've never taken before, and I love so much what the church is doing that I would like to be considered for M&M. So then I will go back to the website where we just were, to the Nominee Information Form, if Chris can find that for us. Because key to this process is this step that maybe some miss unintentionally, maybe some just decide is more work than they want to expend, or I don't know what else prevents people from doing it. Just procrastination would be probably my issue. When I find that form, I am going to fill the form out and submit that to the annual conference office. So Chris, are you finding that?
You're muted, Chris.
It picks and chooses when it wants to display itself.
Yeah, it's got a mind of its own. Now can you see it?
No.
Okay, let me try again.
While she's working on it, I'll talk through it just a little bit. It too has my basic information. There we are. I've been nominated for Mission and Ministry Board Area 1. I would fill that in and include my name and my contact information, phone, cell phone, email. And then this is the part where people maybe get hung up sometimes because you're condensing your faith statement into 3 sentences or less. Not an easy process. But I think what this really wants to know, and we've read these in the annual conference booklet when we see the ballot, is what's really important to you in your understanding of faith and the life of the church. And personally, I feel like it's important for that to be an honest expression. And I know that we hold that sometimes in tension with the awareness that there are kind of coded terms and things that identify us very quickly. If we use the word justice, we're progressives, that kind of thing. But I think we really need to be honest about who we are in these statements, recognizing that there will be diverse candidates on the ballot if we are doing our job right on the nominating committee. And then another couple of sentences on vision. What do I hope is going to happen in this position if I'm serving? And then thirdly, this next question is, what experiences have you had that prepare you for intercultural work on a denominational level? This question is intended to really be purposeful about our intentions to be making contacts, learning from, engaging with various ethnic and cultural communities. So I don't think that it has to say volumes about, your experience in many cultures, but if you've had that, certainly include it. Most of us have had some intercultural experience, and in some cases, people simply say they were teachers in a school where the staff or the students were diverse. That's an intercultural experience in itself. And then address home congregation and district, occupation. Then we also ask about gender and age and racial ethnic background, because all of those are significant in the process as we're trying to balance nominees on a ballot. And so the nominating committee takes seriously each of those categories as we try to process this whole decision. And then there's kind of the history. Leadership positions you've held in a local church. For pastors, that's pretty easy, like me. In the district level, I would then talk about having served on the calling and credentialing team and Shalom team, being the moderator of the district at one time. And then the denominational level, I have been on program and arrangements committee. I've done some writing for Brethren Press, that kind of thing. And on the other relevant leadership positions, I think that is a really open category. It doesn't have to be some professional award or anything that you would necessarily be putting on a resume, but simply some sense of how have you been active in the community or in your own professional circles. How do you function? So for me, I would mention some of the other board positions that I've had, and then in the next question, describe how these roles have provided you with skills and experience. I would simply say some of the experiences in the church have familiarized me with the life of the church, denominationally, district, and locally, and some of my experiences on other boards have helped me to understand how organizations function and make decisions and communicate with each other. Then I would sign it and submit it. And that is the key step that we've missed so many times. So I just want to highlight it again. And Kurt mentioned calling the candidate. And at the time you call, if you're nominating someone, at the time you call, you might reinforce that the nominee information form is an important next step if the person decides to accept the nomination. So those are submitted, and Chris and the annual conference office at this point gathers those over the months between the annual conference at which nominations open and December of that year. Theoretically, the nominations close on December 1st. If we get nominations between December 1st and the time the nominating committee meets, we also accept those nominations. But we're trying to encourage people to do this by December 1st because it makes for less work for the annual conference office as they have to assemble all these forms. They assemble the forms for every nominee, the nominator form and the nominee information form. And they go into a big binder. And I don't know if Chris has a picture of that or not. You don't? Okay. I like the visual of that one because when the nominating committee then arrives in January in Elgin, the first thing that happens is that you're handed a big binder, and it's thick, especially if the church has done its job and submitted a lot of nominations. I want to say just a word before we go further about the nominating committee itself, because one of the questions that came up, and I think most of us here know most of this already, but the nominating committee is a group of 8 people who are elected from the standing committee. And what happens is that every first year member of the standing committee is eligible to be elected. And it's simply an open ballot where each of us writes the name, marks 4 names of the first year people. And whoever gets the most votes end up being the 4 nominating committee members for that year. They join a group that was elected the year before of 4, and each year 4 go off and 4 come on. So the reason that Kurt and I have been able to be on this more than once is because if you return to standing committee or if you serve a second term, you become a first year member again. So there is some overlap in that pool. So at that point in Elgin, we received that binder, and for the rest of the day and evening, we spend time alone in our rooms, reading through all of the forms, making notes and writing down questions and thoughts that we'd like to share with the committee. And then the next day, the committee comes together. And prayer and worship is a part of this process in a way that is very central. Often every session begins with some time that has been planned by one of the members of the nominating committee, and it's thoughtful and very grounded to the extent that we're able to do that. The group works at learning to know each other and to try to begin to establish some level of trust, because the process is honest and sometimes intense, sometimes difficult. So both the trust level and the worship are key elements in this process. And then each nominee is reviewed one at a time. And that process begins with a couple of things that I'm going to ask Chris to talk about, usually begins with this. And then Kurt and I will share some of the other things that get processed and talked about as the nominees are considered.
One of the things we have to consider is whether a person is eligible. Like, for instance, Kurt alluded to the fact that Kim is not eligible to be nominated while she is on standing committee. So a person who's on standing committee or already on a board that is elected by annual conference, they can't be on the ballot for another office. If they are a staff person of an agency, they're not eligible. So there are some eligibility requirements that Jim, as annual conference secretary, goes over very carefully with the committee. And in the annual conference office, we try to kind of screen that. We miss it sometimes though, but we might say, oh, that person is on mission and ministry board, so they're not eligible to be nominated for Bethany board. But sometimes we miss it and nominating committee needs to catch it. The other thing for clergy members we do is give to the Office of Ministry all the names of people who were nominated for any of the offices who are credentialed, and ask, are there any pending ethics cases? So that if someone either has been in an ethics process that resulted in them losing their ordination, Or if they are in the middle of an ethics process, the Office of Ministry will say, there's a concern. They don't give us any details, but they just say, there's a concern. And so that can be reported then to nominating committee so that they're aware that there may be a concern about ethics.
After those original sort of screening questions, the process begins, and with each person, the attempt really is to read really carefully what the nominator has said, and then also to read what the nominee has said and to talk about how those might impact this particular role that they're being nominated for. We take seriously what nominators have said, and also then always ask whether people in the group know this nominee. And, you know, there is a subjectivity about the process sometimes, because if no one knows the person and the information is scant, it can be harder to choose that person. So, you know, being really intentional about what gets put in those forms helps. If somebody is aware of something that feels like a red flag, we try to share that. You know, if we know that this person has functioned in a group in a way that is not very conducive to group process, maybe they're so outspoken and have kind of freedom of releasing temper in settings, group settings, we will consider that. That doesn't immediately mean that someone is ruled out, but those kind of personal style things do get talked about. We share what we know about the candidate in terms of what they've done and how they have been active in their own church settings. So if anybody knows something more about that person, that conversation takes place, and we work that whole list through very slowly and steadily, office by office. So we'll take first, say, the pool of program and arrangements people, and if there are 4 of those, we don't have a lot of decision making to do because we need 4 names, but we still talk about every one of them to be sure that we can affirm that nomination. If there are 12, which is more often the case with something like program arrangements, it takes a little bit more work. As you can imagine, some offices get a whole lot more nominations than others. So it just depends on what comes in. And then there's some other things that we consider. And Kurt, you can maybe start with that.
I just wanted to mention, Kim, that when you were talking about, do we know the people between us, between the 8 of us, it's really pretty remarkable that because we're from all different districts and different places around the denomination, it is quite frequent that we have some connection to many of the nominees. But when we don't, I would agree. I think the amount of information that is on the nomination form helps us. I can think of nominees that they might have been okay, but there was just such scant information. It was really hard. We didn't know them. We just had a limited amount of information. It was hard to make a decision to put them on the ballot. But for better or worse, in the Church of the Brethren, a lot of people know a lot of people. So that's just a fact of the matter. Also, within the nominating committee, there really is a diversity of ideas, of theological perspectives, of experience in the church, and that plays into the decision-making process. We're also looking at the makeup of especially boards, the gender makeup, the age diversity. We'll listen to the head of an agency, whether it's the president of BBT or Bethany Seminary, or the executive director or board chair of OEP, we'll listen to some of what they're looking for in their, in terms of their board makeup. Maybe there's a particular issue that they're working on, or a concern that they're working on. Maybe Bethany was talking, for example, about anti-racism and the kinds of people that they wanted to have on their board come onto their board to help them work with those matters. And so it's not that we're saying, well, whatever you tell us we're going to do, but we're trying to listen to those kinds of factors as well. What else, Kim?
Well, also ethnicity. We take really seriously the nomination of people who are not in the main dominant group in the Church of the Brethren. And so we are seeking to broaden the representation. And what I can really say about this, let maybe just mention also the rural-urban balance. We'd like it if knowing our church is so rural in many areas, we'd like to have that kind of balance represented as well. But let me just say, this is just really probably one of my central plugs. We can work with what we have. So for example, one of the years I was on the nominating committee, we had 3 males who filled out nominee forms, and a 4th who was kind of nominated for more than one office. So we had to make a decision, but it was all men, and it was all white.
For which office, Kim?
For moderator. So we had no female nominees who had filled out the form. So the real point of initial activism, I think there are other things to talk about, which I hope we will talk about either now or in October. But the most important initial step is to get those nominations in and get people to fill out the forms. Now, that said, what happens with that process is that we vote on 4 people for each office in the nominating committee. Sometimes that's by consensus. We usually have tried to work at that kind of consensus building, but sometimes we take a vote if there's a difference, or if it's really unclear to us. Those 4 names are the nominating committee ballot, and they are sent to the standing committee, the full standing committee. And the full standing committee reduces that ballot from 4 to 2. So we could have 2 people of color and 2 white males on a ballot that then ends up with only the white males if the standing committee itself narrows it in that way. And I can tell you, as a person who's been on this committee, that is just very frustrating. So another point of potential addressing this is for people to talk with their standing committee members about what they would like to see the church doing, and to be able to say, we want to see more women, we want to see more people of color, we want to see more people who are not represented at all on our in our church ballots often. We would like for you to include those, and just simply at least to raise your voice in that way. I think we're going to get to the question and answers right now, unless Jim and Chris and Kurt have additions.
I think I just want to hear questions. I don't have any more I need to share.
Yeah.
Jim's got a hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to make just a couple quick comments. One is, I just think it's really important to pray for those persons you are nominating, and to pray for people you didn't nominate, but who are announced as having been nominated, and to let them know, because it's going to require tremendous spiritual strength to take on a position, and it's going to take tremendous spiritual strength to accept if you are not elected. That is a tough go too. So prayer support, I think, is just really important. Another thing I wanted to say, Kim, for what you just said, is that in my experience over 10 years, persons of color generally are chosen by a standing committee, often are elected. Women, however, we often come up short. And I'm not sure what we do with that except to help standing committee as a whole know that's really important to the church. One comment in connection with that. Nominating committee and standing committee have been charged by annual conference to make sure that the ballot is balanced. They have not been given authority or wherewithal to make sure that the outcomes of the election are balanced. And that's an important thing for us to know. That would require a change in polity.
Thank you, friends. There's a number of questions that have come in through the chat. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them that way, or if you want to use the reaction smiley face, click on that and give you a hand to go up and we can see that you have a question. Those are the easiest ways, just because my screen has two screens and that way I'll be able to see that people have questions. So let me hit the ones in the chat first. Rachel asks, what if you have only 4 candidates for a position and the nominating committee doesn't feel good about some of them?
A good question. I think the answer to that might depend on just how not good we felt. If there's a really distinct reason not to include someone, we would take that step. If, for example, if there was an ethical case pending against someone, if there was a really strong consensus that someone was an altogether inappropriate choice, maybe that person would be reconsidered. But generally, if we have only 4 candidates and they are acceptable and we have nothing more to compare it to, those 4 go on the standing committee ballot.
Thanks, Kim. This next question comes from Jesse. How many folks are on the standing committee?
Chris, you just answered that. It changes based on the numbers from churches, but there are 1 or 2 representatives depending on how big the district is. And right now, you just, I think, put 33?
Yes, 33 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Connie has asked, can the nominating committee itself bring forth nominees? And Chris answered that one in the chat as well. Yes, if nominating committee does not have enough nominations, they can brainstorm names. So this next question comes from Kathy. In thinking about the ethics concerns, when some people have lost their ordination because of supporting our LGBT members or being LGBT themselves, how has that been or will that be considered in this process?
I was just starting to answer that and to say, we've actually never had that situation. The only time there have been any ethics cases that have been concerned have been more sexual misconduct.
Debbie Eisenbeis, let's hear from you.
Thanks. So I'm new to the standing committee and to the nominating committee, and I heard Jim say something that I just want some clarification on, that the nominating committee is charged with having a balanced ballot, but not necessarily balanced outcomes. And I understand what you're saying there, but I also know that if you have 2 women running, you're going to get a woman elected. If you have 2 persons of color running, you're going to get a person of color. Now, I understand that there can be nominations from the floor and that kind of thing has happened in the past, but by and large, we understand this, and I do think the impression is, and Jim, maybe you can correct this if I'm wrong statistically, but I think the impression is that if you have a man running against a woman, that the sexism that prevails in the church will bring the man forward, regardless. And maybe he is, mind you, the better candidate. But maybe it's also this, sexism that we have. So I guess I'm wondering if thought is given to that. I mean, mind you, the mandate is not there to have a more structured ballot, but is there some consideration given?
There certainly is conversation about it. And I think, once again, if the numbers of nominations were strong enough to help that process along, I think there are nominating committees that would go ahead and make a choice like that. But without saying this is a structured ballot, but we have 4 qualified women, for example. Really highly qualified. It's rare for some of these offices that we get that number of nominations.
Other questions?
Bobby, I think I want to respond
Please.
to Debbie that I think you're absolutely right. There are more times than not when a man and a woman are both on the final ballot and the male is elected. However, Carol Shepard, who's going to participate in a little bit, was elected moderator elect in 2016 on a ballot against a male. And so it does happen. And I can think of 2 or 3 offices this past year where there was a woman and a male on the ballot and the woman won. So I think you are right, Debbie, that more often than not, men have been elected. But I did see some hopeful signs last summer, and I tried to credit Women's Caucus with it, and they deny any responsibility.
Thank you.
I'd like to piggyback on that, Chris. Danita also was elected when there was a male on the ballot. So we've done that twice in the last 5 years, that a female has been elected moderator. Well, no, a little bit longer than that for Carol, since Carol was moderator. Last year, when there was a male and a female, there were 3 times when the male was elected, and there were 2 times when the female was elected. So yeah, but that is more balanced than it used to be. I remember watching in the past when every single time it was the male. And so I'm glad we're where we're at, but we still have a ways to go, a long ways to go.
So-
Another comment real quick about what Debbie said, if I could, is that when this is talking politics now, and maybe that's not so helpful, but when it is perceived that the nominating committee has forced the issue, the chances of a nomination from the floor are extremely increased.
Mm-hmm.
So when it was able to be announced at one point that yes, there's 2 women on the ballot, but there were men on the initial ballot, and standing committee chose the 2 women, then it comes across a whole lot better. But we can't play politics with all this, but just to be aware of that dynamic.
Thanks for that, Jim. I have a question. So if I'm nominated for something and I fill out my form and I hit submit, and then I realize a day or 2 or a week or 2 later, oh my goodness, I don't think I mentioned that I served on my district Shalom team. Is there a way to make addenda to those submissions?
There is. Debbie Knopfsinger, who is on this call, receives all of those forms, and she can add additional information for a candidate. So if they would just email the annual conference office and say, I'm nominated for program and arrangements, and I'd like to add this part in my leadership experience. Debbie would do that.
Super, thank you. Carol writes in the chat, have any patterns of nomination numbers or sources emerged over the last decade of increased tensions within the Church of the Brethren?
This is the kind of question we always turn to Jim for.
And Jim increasingly has to go back and look at all of them again to figure out patterns of nomination numbers or sources.
Jim, while you're thinking, can I just offer
Please.
one? For many years, the office that we got the most nominations for was program and arrangements. And I think that was because PNAC was the battleground place over BMC having an exhibit. And it's been very interesting to me that in the last number of years, well, we still get a lot of nominations for program and arrangements. It hasn't been the extraordinary number that came in for a while when that battle was so tense. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for, Carol?
Yes, I was just curious if there are things that we've observed over the last few years, things that we might anticipate in the future that might help us figure out how to come up with a greater diversity and greater number of nominations through this process.
I guess one of the things I would say in response, Carol, is that a few districts have really worked to work at nominations. Northern Plains, kudos to Northern Plains. They have the most nominations of any district for several years now, because they spend a deliberate time in discernment in their district meetings to make nominations, not just to people in their district, to people that they know in the church. A pattern has been of fewer nominations for moderator. There never were all that tremendously many, but there used to be enough that there were some that were not chosen. That's rare now. It seems like we're lucky if we get the 4 that we need. So nominations in that realm it would be helpful if people would deliberately work at that. Yeah, I don't know that if that may have to do with increased tensions. I'm not sure.
That said, I think that, am I right, Kurt or Jim, that this last year, I think that the ballot for 8 offices that the nominating committee sent to standing committee was 16 men and 16 women. Yeah. And I think the almost, or maybe all, the number of people who were ethnically diverse in some way was strong. I think even the final results, I wrote that down at one point during conference, but even the final results were fairly well split between at least male and female.
Yeah, and Kim, I did look back and I was wrong. Actually, this last time, 3 women were elected and only 2 men were elected, and there was a male and female on the ballot this last time. So I had that reversed. But this last time, I just finished those statistics. They just haven't been posted yet. This last time, standing committee received a ballot from the nominee committee that had 19 women and 13 men. The annual conference ballot then was pared down to 8 women and 8 men. The election was 4 women and 4 men. And there were 7 racial ethnic on the ballot for standing committee, of whom eventually 3 were elected. 3 racial ethnic folks. So when you know you're paring the ballot down in half, that's about what that did too.
Jesse has a hand up.
Hi, yes, this is Jessie Houff. I have a lot of questions, but I will boil down to the one that I am most interested in. I would like to know, I know that people are nominated and they're put on the ballot and then they go to annual conference and we're a day away from voting. I know that there was at least one instance where someone was nominated and then at annual conference removed from the ballot because he was gay. And I would like to know how something like that is possible, how something like that is allowed. That is a very blunt
Did not
question.
happen. Did not happen that way, Jesse. I'm not sure where that report came from.
Okay, I just know that someone was put on the ballot and then at annual conference was no longer on the ballot.
I don't remember that.
I don't have any recollection of that ever happening, Jesse. There was a gay man on the ballot that a number of conservatives circled around kind of a campaign to get people to vote against him. So he was not elected, but he was on the ballot in spite of a lot of more conservative person's objections. And I think they kind of had a campaign, you know, be sure not to vote for this person because he's homosexual. But he was not removed from the ballot. He just didn't get elected by the delegates.
There was a good bit, Jesse. There was a good bit of public conversation on
Yes.
public media about what a shame that people would make that such a big issue, and of other people saying it's really important that we know these kinds of things about nominees. Why didn't you tell us? So there was a lot of hoopla about it, but he was on the ballot and that did not change.
That is in a way something that I think it probably relates more to what we'll be talking about the next time around, which is what it's like to be a candidate and not be chosen, especially for a reason like that. And I think when we're making nominations, the other side of making nominations is to recognize that people make themselves vulnerable and take the risk of rejection, and it's not an easy thing to do. So, you know, I'm encouraging you to make nominations, but also to be thoughtful and honest with the person that you're talking with about it, because there is risk involved.
Thanks, Kim. We have one more question in the chat, but it's also been answered in the chat. So I just want to lift that up. Sarah asked if there are special qualifications for moderator, whether the person must be ordained. And Dave answered, your 2022 moderator is not ordained, must not be a requirement. And then Jonathan responded with a link to the qualifications for that position. I want to and also, Kim, your last comment just sets us up so beautifully to go to Carol Shepard, who in the past several years has served as moderator and was willing to share with us this evening about her experiences.
Hi. I've actually been on the ballot three times, and twice as for Bethany board, and then once as moderator. All three times I ran against men. All three times I was elected. The second time for Bethany board, I kind of discount because I was running for re-election, and there's ways in which those things kind of roll forward. But I want to point out a couple of things, and there may be ways that I'm a little different just in personality, and I think these things are important. People are different. So Kim described her mock process of discernment once Kurt had called and said, I've nominated you. And as an individual, I would count myself as a little more impulsive than Kim and not quite so deliberate. And I'm sorry, Jim, but agonizing prayer in a novena for days and days and days was not part of my decision-making process. Although I did ask about the job and what does it entail, but I tend to be more impulsive than that. But part of my impulsivity was pretty much motivated by the fact that, of course, I wasn't going to get elected because I'm a woman, and nobody's going to elect a woman. And so this allowed me to be kind of flip about the whole thing. And indeed, in my first election to Bethany Board, I was running against a well-known Pennsylvania scholar in the Church of the Brethren, and I was sure he would be elected. And when I ran for moderator, I was running against a pastor from Pennsylvania, and I was sure he would be elected. And so the decision to let my name be put on the ballot was a personal one. And you saw the nominee form. I filled that out as a spiritual exercise. And I put myself out there trusting in the nomination that I had and said, I actually don't think I'm going to be elected. But I'll give it a go, and people seem to think I can do this. And so I put a lot into filling out the form. But if I didn't get elected, it was okay, because it was a reflection for me. It was an opportunity for me to think about those questions, to think about leadership in the church, and to think about how I might serve. And so I did that. For the Bethany Board position, the things went fairly well, and the president of Bridgewater College at that time, Phil Stone, was very supportive of our participation with the Church of the Brethren. And my position on Bethany Board was, in fact, I think, important for him in how he integrated brethrenness into what Bridgewater was about. And so that was a very happy tale. And I had a wonderful time, 10 years on the board at Bethany. And so that was that's a happy tale. The moderator position was more complicated. I was so sure I wouldn't be elected that I did not even mention that I was up for nomination. But when I was put on the ballot, I approached my then boss about it and said, I've been put on the ballot for this position, and here's what it entails, but no worries, I'm not going to get elected. I'm running against a guy, and it's not going to happen. I was elected, and coincidentally, I also lost my job. And so I might have done better to put a little more Kim in me. But on the other hand, I have no way of knowing how that worked. And it might have been an excellent opportunity for me to be reassigned in a way that had a cool narrative. I don't know that. But I will put that out in that there are costs for these things. And sometimes if we don't count the costs, as Jim and Kim elaborated, we can be surprised by things. Now, the counter to all that is things have worked out fine. And I wouldn't give back my experience as moderator for anything. It was a privilege and an honor and a blessing. And the opportunity I had to travel, domestically in the church and to meet people across the denomination, and to travel internationally and to represent the Church of the Brethren were absolutely would not give it back for anything. And I'm so blessed to have had that opportunity. So I said, Chris called me and said, we want you to talk about this stuff. And I said, well, I don't know if I'm the best person, because I'm a little atypical in sort of how I just kind of impulsively do stuff and then, deal with the consequences afterward. And so that is my story. My dear friend, Ruth Ann Johansson, is my polar opposite, and she'll agonize for 14, 15 years before she makes a decision. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I just encourage people to nominate people and to accept nominations yourself. You know, I have a tendency to not worry about it until somebody makes an issue of it. So you can't do that because you're a blank. When somebody actually comes down to say that, well, then we'll deal with it then. But I have a tendency to just go until there's a roadblock, and that may be different from others who are more cautious. And I tell my story to say, well, they're cautious for good reasons. Bad stuff can happen. But we are different in the way we make our decisions, and we are different in the way we manage our call. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that's. Anything else you wanted me to say, Chris, that I haven't tapped into?
No, I think it was really
what are your
helpful
thoughts?
for you to just share a story that is your real life. I appreciate that, and I don't think you need to say any more.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm going to turn now to our brand new annual conference director to offer an invitation and a challenge. And if she's muted,
unmute. Perhaps just to test the waters, if people are willing to share, how many of you have ever been nominated for a denominational position? And how many of you have ever nominated someone for a denominational position? The only way to broaden representation is to broaden and expand the pool of nominees. And so the nominating committee needs you to do your part. And so I would invite you in the coming weeks and months to engage in prayerful reflection on the open positions and the people you know who may have the gifts to fulfill those roles. And this is not something that you have to do by yourself. As Jim alluded to, the Northern Plains District has worked at this intentionally in a more corporate way. Our standing committee representative has been very diligent in coming to the fall district board meeting with a list of the open positions and inviting the group to spend some time together in prayerful reflection about who the group as a whole knows and who might have those gifts to fill that role. And so as a small district, the Northern Plains District, and I can brag a little bit here because this is my home district at the moment, but has had a disproportionate role in nominations over the last several years because of this. And then we do the same thing at district conference. And then, as Kurt said, once you've made that decision, I would encourage you to call up once you've done that prayerful reflection and identified a person or people, take the time to call them and tell them that you are nominating them and why you are nominating them, and to affirm the gifts and the skills that you see in them. I know there were a couple of times over the years when I was nominated and didn't even know I'd been nominated until I got the notice from the annual conference office. And so take the time. I think it's just it's part of that developing that culture of calling that we need to work at more intentionally in the denomination and as part of the new vision statement. But to take the time to call out people intentionally and let them know what you see in them that God can use in a particular role. So And then, of course, fill out the paperwork and give some very careful consideration to what it is you want to say about that person, because as already been noted, I think that goes a long way, particularly when nominees are less well-known. So if we had a little more time tonight, but I'm conscious of our time, if we had a little more time, I might encourage us to do some brainstorming together, but we'll trust you all to do that, or to find your own communities, whether it's a small group in your congregation or your district, or even a small group of people that you know and relate with across the denomination, that you might meet together and do some intentional brainstorming about potential nominees.
Thanks, Rhonda. Jim writes in the chat, please also nominate a lot of diverse people in your districts to serve in district positions, so that there is good, solid experience for them to show on their nomination forms for denominational offices later on. Thanks for that, Jim. And let me also just mention, if you have other questions that come to you, the annual conference officers, the nominating committee and standing committee are in these positions to serve the denomination. And so please reach out to any of those people to ask your questions. We can keep this conversation going. Brother Jim.
Are you going to say something about the October meeting? Because I want to say appreciation to Jesse and others who've asked questions. It's really important that we get those questions asked. And so we're looking forward to October to hear more questions. Some things we'll have to say, well, that's not how we understand it, or that's not what we understood to have happened. But other things are, and we need to work on them. So we need to hear from you.
Thanks, Jim. In fact, I was just about to turn things over to Jonathan to give us a word about the October workshop and blessing and ascending.
Thanks, Bobby. So before I bless and send you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Women's Caucus and our upcoming events. Caucus is now a 50-year-old organization working towards creating a faith community free from attitudes and practices of injustice, and we center our work with the focus on gender. If you'd like to join us, we have several different levels of involvement: thinkers, doers, friends, and donors. And if you are not yet receiving our quarterly newsletter and want to, just put your email in the chat, and hopefully Bobby can save that for us. We're really delighted that you joined this workshop to learn more about the nomination process. There's a second workshop on October 5th. It's going to be at the same time, and it's titled Counting the Cost in Leadership. So that workshop, as Kim and Jim sort of alluded to, is going to delve into the stories, particularly those who were on the ballot but did not get elected. We're really interested in what is happening to the leaders that have been vetted through the nomination process. So if you want to register for that, you can email Women's Caucus. We'll also have a Facebook event as well. I'd like to thank the annual conference officers and the nominating committee for partnering with us for this workshop. I really hope that this effort to demystify the nomination process was empowering for you. And now a blessing. May we go forth from this space with an invigorated spirit. Let us strive to feel called and call others in healthy and healing ways. Let us continue to ask the hard questions that this very human process requires. Bless this community in our endeavors to seek out good leadership. I'm going to finish the blessing with a favorite one from Mix Chris Page. You are loved when you are living in your body, when you are wrestling in community, when you are sharing the sacred text of your life. You are loved. May we remember that we have already come a long way. Come what may, let us not forget one another or the grace that has brought us together. You are loved. Amen.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tim, for being with us.
Thank you all. I thought that was marvelous.
Yeah, very much appreciated. Okay, we'll catch you later.
Blessings.